We're going to kick off with one of our super experts. I'd like to welcome a very good friend of mine and a thoroughly pleasant person. Brian Trombley has more than 35 years experience helping clients implement content-oriented processes and technologies for all aspects of publishing across a wide range of industry verticals. An early practitioner. Hi, Brian. An early practitioner of structured content methodologies, Brian was at the forefront of SGML and XML revolutions and has helped many clients successfully manage change and leverage content for maximum business value. Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm good, Deepo. How are you? Thank you so much for inviting us to participate.
It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure working with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we ready to go?
I'll let you take it away. You can start sharing. I'm going to come off. When you see me come back on, just my avatar come on, that means you've got 5 minutes. And then when you see me actually, then you've just got 2 minutes left to complete so that we can have that full 5 minutes of questions and answers from our audience. Is that okay with you?
Excellent. That's fine.
It's all yours.
Okay, let me just start the slideshow. Can everybody see? Can you see? Let me just see if I can get my sharing going. Now I seem to be having... Are we seeing?
We can see that.
Okay, great. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Deepo, for inviting me. Thank you, Jean-Luc, for inviting me. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the positive impact of a robust review and approval workflow across a highly regulated global enterprise. And I'm sure you can extrapolate a lot of this down to your enterprises if they aren't regulated or as regulated. But I wanted to take some extreme example to talk about some of the issues that we see out there in these regulated industries. Just a quick test here. Deepo, is my slide progressed here? Just making sure everything's working. Yes? No? I'll assume that's a yes then. So my name is Deepo. Yes, can you hear me?
Everything's working fine. Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Just checking. Was a little worried there for a moment. Okay, so as Deepo said, I'm Brian Trombley. I'm a CEO of Ariza Content Solutions. I've been involved in content management and publishing technologies for over 40 years. Before XML, before SGML, old proprietary systems. I spent much of my early career traveling the globe, helping newspapers and magazines, as well as technical publishers, get their content in order and keep it flowing the way it needs to flow. Knowledge in all aspects of structured markup publishing and content management. I've worked on a large number of platforms over the years. And, you know, as one of my good friends, Sabina Oker, says, I've been around the block, and I tell her I've been around the block a few times because I've seen the technology change, the markup change, the structure change, the platforms and tools change, right? So with that, just a little self-promotion here, Ariza Content Solutions. We're specialists in all aspects of content management, provide end-to-end solutions, or help you retool some of your processes to drive efficiencies and automations in it. We do these for any organization looking to optimize their content processes. So that could be publishing content management, digital asset management, more akin to today's presentation, data XML component content management, where we've spent a lot of time, workflow automation, automated publishing, and then virtually any variant of XML content management. So that could be S1000D for aerospace. I do a lot of work with societies and associations, so JATS and BITS and STS XML come into play there. So we provide advisory services, planning, implementation. We provide our customers with an option to have us be their first line of support. So we have support services agreements with many of our clients, and we can provide staffing augmentation if you have a hole in your resources for a period of time. We can usually plug that hole with an expert resource for a short period. Okay, some of you may know this person here, Captain Obvious. He's a spokesperson for a online booking service called Hotels.com, and his big mantra is it's obvious. Why didn't you book on Hotels.com, right? So I'm going to be speaking today about a lot of obvious things, okay? And maybe they aren't so obvious to some of you, but they probably are obvious to others of you. And when they're obvious, they're pretty painful. So we're looking to mitigate pain here today. So let's set the stage a little bit. We're going to be talking about regulated industries, and to name a few, we've got banking, financial services, insurance, telecommunications, transportation, that's both on the ground and in the air, and maybe in space as well. Life sciences, and we're going to use some examples here, which is a very highly regulated industry. Healthcare, energy, which is not just oil and gas, finding it and producing it, but also generating energy and delivering energy from those those resources. Agriculture. People may not realize how regulated agriculture is, but it's a fairly regulated industry. Construction and defense, just to name a few. There are many other industries that are regulated, but these are the ones that are sort of top of mind. So let's set the stage a little bit more. In any of these industries, but especially in life sciences, lots of content gets created, a ton of content. And some of that content's never really published, but it's used to get approvals, and then some of that drives content that's published to regulators, to the public as part of marketing and promotion activities. So an immense amount of content gets created. And all of this content needs to be reviewed inside and outside of the sphere of content creators, right? So those content creators are very comfortable in the tools and the platform they have to work in, and that's their office, right? They're in a content management system. They're using authoring tools. They might be using some tools to illustrate things, but they're fairly comfortable in that environment. But outside of that environment are a number of subject matter experts or other entities that need to weigh in, whether they be partners, external resources such as freelancers, or regulatory bodies, right? So you've got this content. We're all comfortable creating it and pushing it around until it's time to review. But then we need to push this content out to those more casual users that are not comfortable or could be comfortable, but they haven't had the opportunity to work within the tooling and sets of technology that we have to bring to bear. And as part of these review processes, we need to collect comments. We need to reconcile those comments. And then we need to edit the content based on those comments, right? And then final versions, and I say final, nothing's ever final till it's final. Final versions need to be recirculated for final approval, or more often than not, another round of comments and changes before actual finalization, right? So if we look at the life sciences challenge, we have many different sets of content, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent slide. But we also have many internal stakeholders in the process. So it's not just those that create the content, but when we go into a review stage, you have legal, safety, compliance, marketing, many others within your actual organization need to have some purview of what we're putting forth for whatever purpose we're putting it forth, and we need to make sure it's what we need to achieve our goals, right? We also have many external stakeholders in the process, outsourced resources. So in drug development, CROs, and many other outsourced resources, we have, when we get to the point where we've been approved for something and we're going into advertising and promotion, we have agencies and other entities that have to weigh in on what we're saying here, because that whole promotion piece is very, very regulated. More often than not, you'll have external legal resources and teams that you engage with on a regular basis. Most organizations in life sciences have robust internal legal staff, but they're always relying on external legal entities to help them with making sure everything is right and meets the requirements for approval on the regulatory bodies. And then you have the regulatory bodies themselves. And it's not just, hey, I've got a new drug coming out, I'm going to the FDA. Yeah, everything's good. No, there's so many sub-bodies within the FDA or other global drug regulatory bodies that decide if a drug or a biologic or a medical device is safe and appropriate for their market, right? And there's a whole host of others as well. So when we look at regulated content, it's pretty much everything. In pharmaceuticals, you've got your new drug application, you've got to go through all your clinical trials, and there's a whole slew of approvals from the FDA even to get to that point. And then within that point, you have, your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and you're measuring and assessing every step of the way, right? And then you have all sorts of submissions, results of your clinical trials for your approval. You've got, and if you get approved, it's not done. You've got, labeling issues. You've got to maintain core data sheets that will have core information across, global regulatory agencies. And then you have to boil that down to what does the FDA need? What do we need in the EU? What do we need in Brazil? Those sorts of things. And then you have packaging, which all has to be reviewed and approved by these regulatory bodies. And then marketing and promotion content. Again, it varies greatly. Everything has to be approved by some sort of regulatory body. And, in some markets, you can't even promote your drug. You have to promote a condition that has treatment, and then you have to refer, the people looking at that promotion, whether it's a video or an audio or a print promotion, you have to point them back to their practitioner. In the US, you can, speak a little bit more freely about your drug and your approach and how it's great, but you also have to say how it's bad. And all of that needs to be approved. So there's a tremendous amount of content that gets created just to bring a drug to market. And people, I think, sometimes don't realize that some of these drugs take 10 or 12, 15 years before they actually get to market. And then when you get it to market, you may find that there's off-label uses for it, and that creates another sort of review and approval cycle and years of angst to get that approval to expand your ability to sell that to a wider audience. Medical devices are similar. They all need to be designed with safety and effectiveness in mind. They get classified, class 1, class 2, class 3. There's subclassifications. There's a whole range of data and content that's collected as part of that process that then goes again back through various regulatory bodies to assess and approve. And you have a lot of post-market surveillance. and seeing what's going on as these products come to market and they're used. Labeling, just like a pharmaceutical or drug, whether it's a prescription drug or an over-the-counter drug, it still needs to go through a labeling process, and that needs to be approved. And the medical devices are no different. You've got your instructions for use and other things that have to be reviewed on a regular basis and approved, right? And then the same marketing and promotion content that you would have with a pharmaceutical, with a prescription drug or a biologic. So in these organizations, I think business as usual ends up being disjointed and broken PDF-based reviews. Some of them may be reviewed within a content management system, but that's probably not optimal, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. And when you get into one of these review cycles where you're passing information around to these various non-core content creators, to these entities that need to weigh in on the content, need to suggest changes, need to say no, or need to say yes, but you've got a process now that's not connected totally to the source content in a content management system. Okay, and that creates a problem. It creates a number of problems. One of those problems is then it's difficult to reconcile comments and changes against the source content. So if I'm sending out a bunch of PDFs, and even if I'm using some of the tools that are available from Adobe and others to review PDF content, you're looking at a PDF. You're not looking at the source content in your content management system. So you're disconnected, and you need to then grab everything back and assess it. And then somebody needs to affect those changes in the source content, right? So there's one area where you're adding risk to your process, right? The other area is there's no real traceability at the source content level, in that you may be using a tool, or you may be using just comments in Word. You've passed PDFs around. You're using comments back to you in Word, and those need to get in. Those changes need to get into the content, but you don't have a way to trap who said what, when, and why, right? So that means there's no real auditability at the source content level. That's dangerous. That's risk. Okay. Take a moment and read this. I'll give you 30 seconds to read this, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Okay. So one of the things that we don't think about, other than if we have a broken review and approval process and how painful it is and how much time it takes, that's typically what we find out. We think about, how much time it takes, and can we get this done? Can we get this done? Can we get this done? But there's a cost to that. There's a cost to broken processes where you can't efficiently move content through a review and approval process in a way that every entity that needs to comment on that review comment has a seamless, frictionless way to do that. And that's a big pain. And if you spend some time looking at some of your processes and trying to figure out how each one costs, and if you have to run that same process again, how much it costs, not only in dollars but in time, right? It's amazing when some people, some organizations, go through this exercise. They don't realize how much money they're wasting, how much time they're wasting by not thinking about changing their processes and looking for a better way forward, right? So a way forward. One of the things you need to do, whether you're looking at a new platform, maybe you're considering a move to DITA and you're assessing platform vendors, or maybe you are you've been on DITA for, I'm working with one client now who's been on DITA for 12 years, but they're going to re-platform, right? They've outgrown their existing platform. They need to look at a new one. They're not considering their existing vendor. So these are the sorts of things that you need to look at when you're considering a platform, right? So all of the platform vendors have workflow, right? But most often that workflow is really geared towards the core content creators and in terms of helping them get their job done pre-review cycle. So what you need to do is demand from your platform vendors a more robust workflow, especially around review and approval. So everybody should have easy access to a review process. That's an easy one to achieve. You send somebody an email with a link to a review task that's within your system. But the really difficult one to achieve is giving those subject matter experts that are occasional users or very occasional users a frictionless and easily understandable review approval process, right? So a review process that streamlines comment, reconciliation, and final edits is absolutely necessary. Someone shouldn't have to go collect and collate someplace those comments. And then a review process that maintains the who, what, when, and why traceability, which is incredibly important to minimize risk, right? It's great. I've got these PDFs. I've got everybody's comments. I know when they made them. They added some notes. They suggested changes. But that's in the PDF. It's not in the source content. You want that information captured and maintained with the source content, with every version of the source content, with every additional review cycle of the source content. You want that. You need that traceability. And you also need, this is a big one I see, a process that can't be cheated or worked around because it's not user-friendly, right? An example I'd use is, and I'm sorry, I'm old, and this is an old person's example. My children were born digital, so they tend to want to work in a digital fashion. But I see a lot of folks, when they're handed a PDF for review and approval, that they actually print it out, and then they go and mark it up with a pen or pencil. They do their little editorial thing, put some side notes in, edit out some things and write above it. And then they scan it and they send it back to the person who's in charge of finalizing the review and approval process. That's cheating and working around the system, right? So if you have a robust and easy to use review and approval process, there's a number of things that you're going to be able to address: shorter review cycles, traceability, auditability, risk reduction, and just as important as the risk reduction, I think in a lot of cases, time to market advantage. That's inherent in almost every industry. I see that a lot in semiconductors and other technology, being able to get your product out ahead of the competition. So in the shorter review cycles, ways that you can handle that are having an online experience that's directly connected to the content, right? So as these suggested edits and comments and notes are being made, they're being tracked against the actual content. They're not being tracked against a copy of the content that's been put out there that then needs to be brought back in and aligned with the actual content. Another thing that a robust review and approval workflow will provide is a better user experience for those occasional reviewers. So those are, maybe some within your organization, your legal team, your safety and compliance team, some of the subject matter experts in other areas, but definitely for any external resources that are having to come to bear. Now, granted, some of those external resources aren't going to be working in your review process. For instance, the FDA is not going to use your tool, right? You're going to, prepare what you need to send to the FDA, the proper forms, the proper materials, and you're going to send it to them, and they're going to send you something back, and somebody's going to have to reconcile that into the system. But for those occasional users, and those could be, external legal teams, freelancers, your agency partners for marketing and promotion, having a simple and straightforward user experience is going to help them do their work as it applies to the particular workflow or approval process you've got going on. Again, traceability tied to source. Who said what? What did they say? When did they say it? Why did they say it? So notes, timestamps, comments, all of those things are critical to support auditability and reduce risk. And then again, that shorter review cycle, points to time to market advantage. The traceability reports to the auditability and the risk reduction process. I've been privy over the last couple of months to some of what Companize has been doing with their new review and approval workflow process, and I'm fairly impressed. And it's one of the reasons that when Deepo asked me to be part of this, I said yes, absolutely. I think at this point, Companize is setting the standard, or a standard, for ease of review and approval, right? And I think what you'll see later today in this session is when Deepo demonstrates something that's pretty. Deepo, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say it's mind-blowing because as Captain Obvious, it's obvious we should be doing this, for a long time. So much pain in what's going on. So I would suggest that that you pay careful attention, and if any of you have to jump off, you should get back with Deepo and Jean-Luc if you need a one-on-one with where they're going with their review and approval process. So if we look back a few slides, and these are the same bullet points: easy access to the review process, frictionless and easily understandable for the occasional reviewer and approval, a review process that streamlines, and I'm sorry I'm reading here, but I'm making points. These are obvious points. Captain Obvious is speaking.
As you said, yeah.
A review process that streamlines content, reconciliation, and final edits, and a review process that, and this is so important in these regulated industries, a review process that captures and maintains the who, what, when, and why traceability aspect, and one that cannot be cheated or worked around because it is not user-friendly. Yeah. Right? If you have that user-friendly for the occasional user process going on, they'll get used to it and they'll work in it, and things will be great.
Yeah.
And so I know I'm under
you're
time
just
here.
at time, so I mean I let you go on, I let you go past your time actually, because you were so interesting to listen to, and like, well, you were plugging our product at the end, so I couldn't exactly like
well, but you know what, I had to do that because I'm so impressed with what I've seen. Saw it at Convex, and you gave me a heads up on it a few months ago. And I just think people need to look at what you're going to show and use that as a standard for their discussions with you or with other vendors on their platforms.
Well, what we'd like,
so with that, I'm going to stop. And
ideally, what we'd like is for everyone to come and join us on the Companize Early Access Club. we've got a group going on LinkedIn. So like, click on that link, that you see at the bottom there, and you go straight onto our LinkedIn pages, and you can come and join us there. Okay, but more about that at a later state when I do the demo of the prototype. But thank you very much, Brian. It's been an excellent and most informative talk there. I'm just trying to see if there's any questions that I think you were so complete that most people were engrossed, and we're not seeing any questions. Just checking with the rest of the team. And
I'll be around if questions come in later, or if we want to do something,
Yeah.